Greetings and salutations, everyone. My name is Ange Kirchhoff, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today, we're talking about my Week 9 running back rankings for the 2021 fantasy football season. On today's episode, we're covering all topics related to the running back position, beginning with matchups. We'll talk about which defenses thus far this season, on average, are giving up the most points to opposing running backs in a half PPR scoring format, in order to kind of give ourselves more insight as to who has the most advantageous matchup and how that will potentially affect a running back's overall upside going into the week. After we talk about matchups, we'll transition into my top 36 running back rankings, as I'll share with you guys, of course, my thought process, my opinions, and the statistics that justify my reasoning as to how I think the running back position is going to stack up when all is said and done by the end of Week 9. Before we begin today's video, let's not forget there are 4 teams on bye, so we will not have the services of running backs from the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, Washington Football Team, Detroit Lions, and Seattle Seahawks. Though that may hurt some of our teams, hopefully you checked out yesterday's waiver wire video and could potentially go on ahead and pick up some of those talented players and use them into this upcoming week's matchup and hopefully for weeks to come. Outside of that, if you guys have not yet already and you're new to the channel, make sure you subscribe. We are on our way to 60,000 subscribers. Again, we are very close to 56,000. So if you're trying to find yourself fantasy football content on the daily for the entirety of the 2021 season and help yourself capture a 2021 fantasy football championship, this is the place to do it. So subscribe. Of course, thank you for those of you who have continued to support me throughout the way, whether it is with your viewership, liking down below, all the above. If you guys haven't checked out Underdog Fantasy, there's a link down in the description of the video for those of you who are trying to play fantasy outside of your respective league, whether it is the NFL, NBA, NHL, the World Series. You can find fantasy football in all categories via Underdog Fantasy, whether it is their weekly contests, their pick'ems. It's another way to play fantasy football and find more fun throughout the week. So for those of you who are interested, use promo code Andrew today. And when you sign up, Underdog Fantasy is willing to match up to $100 of your first deposit. So for those of you who are interested, check that out. What are you waiting for? Use promo code Andrew today. Thank you very much. All right, let's talk about the running back position. Again, last night we saw another player kind of announce themselves, which was Derrick Gore of the Kansas City Chiefs. I think he is potentially another one of these options that you can go and pick up via waiver wire. Obviously, when I recorded my waiver wire video yesterday, it was prior to the Monday Night Football game. So as of that, he is another option. He will be mentioned on today's video and ranked within the top 36. So if you're trying to hear some information on that and all other running backs that you're specifically trying to find, you can go down to the description of the video and find timestamps down there as well. Thank you very much. All right, let's talk about the running back position, beginning with matchups. As we progress to Week 9, again, there's a lot of volatility at the running back position, but what we continue to find as a consistent factor is that running backs are going to succeed and sometimes fail based on matchups, because again, some of these defenses are really great against opposing running backs. For example, the New Orleans Saints this season are giving up the fewest yards per carry average amongst all teams in the National Football League with 3.02 yards per rush. Now, in comparison to some of these other teams that are giving up 5 yards per carry, obviously there's a huge difference maker, while also teams like the Detroit Lions, the New York Jets, Los Angeles Chargers, they've given up double-digit touchdowns to opposing running backs, and it hasn't stopped, and it isn't going to stop, as these defenses just don't have the talent and don't have the scheme in order to stop opposing running backs on a consistent basis. Now, with this all said, as you look to the very left side of the screen, we have it titled 2021 running back fantasy points allowed. This is how many points defenses are giving up to opposing running backs on average in a half PPR scoring format. Again, meaning everyone in the middle, whether you do play in a full or a standard scoring format. Now, going into this upcoming week, of course, we once again see the New York Jets, Detroit Lions, Los Angeles Chargers, Philadelphia Eagles, and Seattle Seahawks amongst the top teams giving up points to opposing running backs. We certainly want to start up our running backs against those defenses every single week, because again, if they're going to give up free points and they cannot stop the run and your team gets into a positive game script, of course they're going to consistently run the ball and find a lot of value, especially if in fact garbage time is going to be a factor. So take that into account. On the other side of the coin, we have the Buffalo Bills giving up the fewest points to opposing running backs thus far this season. Carolina Panthers, Indianapolis Colts, of course the New Orleans Saints, and the Cleveland Browns amongst the teams on the bottom there, followed by the Pittsburgh Steelers and Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who we all know are typically defenses we don't want to start our running backs against, unless of course they have some sort of receiving upside or are going to get a rushing touchdown. Now, speaking of rushing statistics, I wanted to go ahead and once again isolate that. To the right of that, we have 2021 running back rushing stats allowed titled, because I wanted to go ahead and kind of give you guys some perspective as to which teams are giving up the most points to running backs via running yardage and touchdowns alone, not counting the receiving work, because mainly receiving work is often due to your team's scheme and whether or not the quarterback position is going to continue to target them rather than who you're playing against. So with that said, the Los Angeles Chargers, New York Jets, Detroit Lions, Houston Texans, Philadelphia Eagles, very familiar teams in terms of giving up normal points, but they're giving up the most points on ground to opposing running backs via rushing and rushing touchdown statistics. All that taken into account, I will be referring back to these statistics as we progress throughout the video, but I wanted to go ahead, first and foremost, mention these as we do every single week and give you guys a little bit more perspective. If you want, go ahead and pause this. Otherwise, we're going to continue on to our top 36 running back rankings. Do not forget, rankings are always subject to change. And as the week progresses, my rankings change maybe 10 different times as I'll be fluctuating players up and down based on different variables, whether it is injuries, other players missing, the defense getting a player back. Different things can change on a weekly basis. So do not take this as the end-all be-all, because the end-all be-all will be on Sunday mornings, 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. For those of you who are interested, Kickoff with Kirikoff. I go ahead and stream every Sunday morning for 2 hours in order to help you set your lineups with updated rankings. So for those of you who are trying to get your lineup set on the morning, you can show up there and watch as we talk and answer questions, help you guys out. All right, before we begin, I want to go ahead and take a moment of silence for those of you who are managers of Derrick Henry. I did say it the last couple weeks, Derrick Henry is going to be the number one until further notice, until the rest of time, and unfortunately, a reality has came upon us that is undeniable. Derrick Henry will potentially miss the remainder of the season, 6 to 10 weeks with the foot surgery that he had earlier today. We're going to have a moment of silence, and then we're going to go ahead and replace him with another running back at number one. Here we go. Thank you very much. All right, let's get into this now. It is a new era. It is a new wave of the running back position, and we are trying to survive with the injuries that we are sustaining. But nonetheless, we begin with Jonathan Taylor as our number one overall running back. Jonathan Taylor is the number 2 overall running back in fantasy right now, only behind Derrick Henry. So it makes sense to go ahead and give him the nod and give him this overall position. Since week 4, he's been the number 1 overall running back in terms of total points in a half PPR scoring format. In the last 5 games alone, he has scored 7 touchdowns. He is an unstoppable force, and as we have seen Nyheim Hines kind of be faded out of this entire offensive scheme, slowly but surely Jonathan Taylor is taking over. The offensive line is healthy. Carson Wentz is playing significantly better, though he's making terrible decisions in the late half of the game. It's irrelevant. Jonathan Taylor is getting it down through the air, on the ground. He is scoring consistent amount of points, and he takes on the New York Jets, the easiest matchup at the running back position, who have given up 13 double-digit performances to opposing running backs this season already. It's a beautiful matchup. It's a short week, and from what we've seen on Thursday Night Football, running backs dominate. Let's talk about the last 2 Thursday Night Football games. Cleveland versus the Denver Broncos. D'Ernest Johnson went off. Melvin Gordon scored a touchdown. Javonte Williams scored a touchdown. All 3 were relevant. Following up, of course, with the Arizona Cardinals and Green Bay Packers game. Aaron Jones, monster. A.J. Dillon had an incredible game on the ground. We had James Conner score 2 touchdowns and Chase Edmonds score a touchdown. The running back positions on short weeks, on Thursday nights, that's the determining factor. It'll be Jonathan Taylor this week as our number 1. Austin Ekeler is our number 2. Now, if you want to talk about being the pure number 2 running back, it really shouldn't be a surprise that Austin Ekeler is here. He's coming off of a week in which he missed multiple practices and was like, you know what? Don't worry about it. I'm going to drop 21.4 fantasy points nonetheless. An absolutely incredible performance coming off of the bye week. As I look at Austin Ekeler, I think to myself, well, he's probably going to be in this conversation rest of season. I mean, just in terms of total fantasy points per game scored this season, he's the number 2 overall running back with 19.5 points per game in a half PPR scoring format, which only scales in a full PPR, considering he's coming off of a week in which he had 6 receptions, 60 yards, but of course, 10 total targets. As those numbers and those opportunities continue to climb, the fact that he's running as well as he has, and of course, he's getting the goal line work, it's continuing to lead to his success. The thing that I wanted to mention last but not least, of course, they take on the Philadelphia Eagles, the 4th easiest matchup at the running back position. As of the last 6 games of this year, the Philadelphia Eagles have given up 100 rushing yards in 5 out of those last 6 games and have given up 9 total touchdowns to opposing running backs in those last 6 games. It's an incredible matchup. Austin Ekeler certainly will be taking advantage of it. Dalvin Cook is our number 3, and though Dalvin Cook had a very lackluster performance this last week, that's his 2nd worst performance that he has produced since 2019. It is very seldom that we see Dalvin Cook have himself a week in which he's not getting utilized in the receiving game, of course, at 2 targets, 0 receptions, and he's not scoring a touchdown, despite having himself 18 carries, 78 yards. I would purely describe it as the entire offense and the entire Minnesota Vikings team falling apart. Mike Zimmer's not really sending them in the correct direction, but hopefully they can get back on track here with Kirk Cousins off of the I don't know. I mean, every time Kirk Cousins plays on primetime football, he just disappears. Hopefully we're going to go ahead and get past that. They take on the Baltimore Ravens this week. And though the Baltimore Ravens defense has shown at times to be a great overall defense in terms of stopping running backs, they're still giving up the 9th most points to opposing running backs this season. Just recently, the Cincinnati duo of Samaje Perine and Joe Mixon, 111 yards on the ground, 2 touchdowns. On top of that, we saw the Indianapolis Colts backfield, 118 rushing yards and a touchdown, along with, of course, Jonathan Taylor tearing it up through the air, 116 receiving yards and a receiving touchdown. This defense in Baltimore has allowed 9 touchdowns to opposing running backs this season. That number is going to continue to climb as Dalvin Cook is going to find himself in the end zone this week. Moving on to Najee Harris of the Pittsburgh Steelers. He has been unbelievable. Since week 2 in the National Football League, Najee Harris has been the number 5 overall running back in fantasy. On top of that, he's number 3 in terms of fantasy points per game scored with 19.7 since week 2. Now, in terms of overall productivity, as long as he's getting the volume of touches that he's going to continue to see, I mean, nobody's really going to be able to stop him. There's a reason why, since week 2, he's put up nothing less than double-digit fantasy points. He's continuously scoring. He's finding himself in scenarios in which, of course, regardless of how bad the offensive line has played, he's going to regardless succeed because he's talented. He's able to make defenders miss and find himself great overall upside. This upcoming week, they take on the Chicago Bears. They're in the middle of the pack in terms of giving up points to running backs, but just recently, Elijah Mitchell, 137 yards and a touchdown. Tampa Bay's duo of Leonard Fournette and Rojo combined for 144 on the ground and a rushing touchdown. Green Bay's duo of A.J. Dillon and Aaron Jones, 135 yards on the ground. This defense, without Khalil Mack there, of course, has been struggling in terms of stopping the run and will continue to do so as Najee Harris and the Pittsburgh Steelers are coming to town in order to run the ball and take over that game. Moving on, we have Aaron Jones as our number 5, coming off of an incredible game and honestly should have had an even better and more impactful performance in terms of fantasy, considering at the very end of that game, he had a touchdown that was a rushing touchdown. Obviously, he didn't break the play, but it got called back, and they weren't able to, without the next couple opportunities, punch it in at the end of the game. They ended up turning it over on 4th down and giving the Arizona Cardinals an opportunity to come down the field and score. Nonetheless, the Kansas City Chiefs is the matchup this week, giving up the 14th most points to opposing running backs. I mean, Devontae Booker last night had 125 all-purpose yards, 6 receptions for the New York Giants against this Kansas City Chiefs defense and this entire Kansas City Chiefs team that is looking like a shell of themselves. Defensively, not playing well. Offensively, I mean, they look lost. It is unbelievable for me to even contemplate that or even absorb that kind of a reality, but it is what it is. We're going to have to react to it as we progress. Coming off of last week's performance, of course, Aaron Jones having 11 targets for 7 receptions. That's literally the most receptions he's had since in 2019 game. Twice in 2019 was he able to get 7 receptions. Mainly had to do with the fact that, of course, no Adams, no Lazard, no Marquez Valdez-Scantling. Now, no Robert Tonyan going forward. That is a big difference maker. But going forward into this week, I think it's an incredible matchup and one. They will be ahead and they will be leading and, of course, running the rock with Aaron Jones. We move on to our number 6, Alvin Kamara. The reason why I have Alvin Kamara at number 6 mainly has to do with the fact that the quarterback situation and the implementation of marking him going forward is going to potentially hurt Alvin Kamara's overall upside. And though I am hoping that's not going to be the case, let's think about what Alvin Kamara typically is known for: scoring touchdowns and receiving work, whether it is receptions, receiving yards, etc. And the thing that potentially is going to transpire with the ACL injury to Jameis Winston is, of course, Taysom Hill taking the starting job over Trevor Siemian, and Taysom Hill not targeting the running back position. We can go back to last year in the 4 games that Taysom Hill started. He does not target the running back position, and typically running quarterbacks do not do so, because typically when they're in a situation where their first, second read is not available, they begin running the ball, not looking for their check down. So going into these upcoming weeks, we may see a little bit of a struggle for Alvin Kamara as he won't have the upside in receiving work. Hopefully he will, but I'm assuming he won't. On top of it, Taysom Hill is a vulture on the goal line. So is Mark Ingram. These guys could take away value. Nonetheless, they take on the Atlanta Falcons. The last 2 times he's played against the Atlanta Falcons were with Taysom Hill. In those games, he was able to get a touchdown in both of them, 45 rushing yards in one, 88 in the other. Very minimal receiving work, to say the very least. I think there's a lot of potential for Alvin Kamara. I'm just concerned about the overall options of his offense and what exactly is going to transpire down on the goal line, which is the biggest difference maker of being a top-end RB1 or among the bottom. Either way, the Atlanta Falcons matchup is a good one. Of course, the Carolina Panthers went for 138 and a touchdown just this last week. I think Alvin Kamara will hopefully be fine, but just wanted to go out and throw out those reservations that I have in regards to it. Moving on to Ezekiel Elliott. It can probably just be validated once again that Zeke without Dak Prescott is not in a good situation. And it shouldn't be a surprise. They key in on him. They go ahead and they run commit when he is obviously in the backfield and it's an early down. Cooper Rush really can't do much in that regard. But it doesn't matter who the quarterback is. As long as it's Dak, he's good to go. In the last 11 games that he has played with Dak, which pretty much includes this season and 2020 season prior to Dak's injury. In the last 11 games in a half PPR scoring format with Dak in the lineup, Ezekiel Elliott is averaging 18.75 fantasy points per game. If that doesn't validate Dak Prescott's impact on this offense and specifically Ezekiel Elliott, then I don't know what possibly could. Nonetheless, they take on the Denver Broncos this week. And I'm going to completely forget about last week's performance. I don't care that he ran for 3.1 yards per carry. Tyron Smith was out, of course, early in that game, and Dak Prescott wasn't there. The thing that I look at the Denver Broncos and think to myself is their best interior defensive lineman's out. Bradley Chubb's not there. They just traded away Von Miller. They've been in desperate need of linebacker help. Of course, they traded for one from the Rams a week ago. In the last 4 games, the stat that really is glaring to me and makes me think that Ezekiel Elliott's going to be just fine this week is that in the last 4 games, they're giving up 123 yards on the ground on average, and they've given up 5 touchdowns to opposing running backs in the last 4 games as well. It's a lot of stats going in the direction of Cowboys running backs this week. They should be perfectly fine. Moving on to Darrell Henderson. Now, Darrell Henderson, in 7 of his 8 games, has put up 14.1 plus fantasy points in a half PPR scoring format. He's coming off of a week in which he had 2 total touchdowns, could have had a third. He dropped the third touchdown, which was pretty much an arrow route to the pylon. Matthew Stafford put it on his hands. He dropped it, unfortunately. But going into this upcoming week's matchup, I think to myself, well, we're talking about a running back like Darrell Henderson, who has scored 7 total touchdowns this year, which is 4th amongst all running backs in the National Football League, tied for 4th at least. Now, one of the main contributing reasons why Darrell Henderson's found so much success in this offense isn't because of the absence of a Sony Michel contributing here, because we knew it was going to be a single man's job in this backfield as it has been in majority of Sean McVay's career with the Los Angeles Rams. But it's mainly been because the Los Angeles Rams offense is firing on all cylinders. They're averaging 30.6 points per game as an offense. That's 5th in the National Football League. And as long as you're going to continue to score and have incredibly good matchups, the Sunday Night Football game against the Tennessee Titans does not worry me. Jonathan Taylor recently, 70 yards and a touchdown. James Robinson, 149 and a touchdown. There is a lot of potential to be had here. Darrell Henderson is in a perfect spot to once again succeed. Nick Chubb's our number 9. Now, I know what you may be wondering. Andrew, why didn't Nick Chubb get a scoring touchdown? Why did he leave us with 7.4 fantasy points? I understand. But you have to take into account that D'Ernest Johnson had only 5 touches on Sunday. Yes, he vultured a touchdown, but this is something that's going to happen in this backfield. This is what Kevin Stefanski does, I guess. He did it with Kareem Hunt. He's going to do it with D'Ernest Johnson. But nonetheless, 5 touches isn't enough to scare me off from Nick Chubb, especially against the Cincinnati Bengals, who are now giving up the 10th most points to opposing running backs based on the incredible performances of Michael Carter going for 27 fantasy points and Ty Johnson going for 17 fantasy points just this last Sunday in an unbelievable game in which the Jets beat the Cincinnati Bengals. Either way, we're talking about a run-first football team, and obviously they're going to run the ball. They're going to do it far more effectively than they did against the Pittsburgh Steelers last week. They may be struggling running it to the right side of the offensive line because Conklin, their all-pro right tackle, he is out, going to be missing some time. But either way, when I look at this offense and I look at Nick Chubb and what his overall potential is, he is always capable for going for 100 yards and a touchdown every single game. It's just a matter of whether the opportunity is there and the matchup is good enough. I think the matchup is perfectly fine. I think, in fact, it's one that they're familiar with. And one that Nick Chubb, the last time he played against Cincinnati, went for over 130 rushing yards and 2 touchdowns. There's a lot of potential to be had here, and that is why Nick Chubb sits at number 9. Number 10 is Joe Mixon. On the other side of the matchup, we have the Cincinnati Bengals starting running back Joe Mixon, who is getting a lot of usage in the air. 5 targets leading to 4 receptions, 58 yards and a touchdown against the Detroit Lions. Had himself a nice pass that went down the sideline for a touchdown. His utilization in the passing game is going to continue to unlock his potential because though he is getting a lot of touches per game, his effectiveness on the ground has never been there because the Cincinnati Bengals offensive line has never been the most efficient group in terms of being able to open up holes for a Joe Mixon-like running back. But 14 carries for 33 yards, 2.4 yards per carry, that is going to be significantly more difficult, obviously considering they take on the Cleveland Browns, giving up I think it's the 6th fewest points to opposing running backs this season. It's a tough matchup. But with that all said, I look at this upcoming week's matchup and I think, well, if Najee Harris can go for 91 yards and a touchdown, there is a very good chance that Joe Mixon, who is getting about 20 touches per game on average this season, is going to get into that range. As long as he's touching the ball 20 times, it's accuracy by volume. The more touches you have, regardless of how ineffective you are, the more opportunity you'll have to score fantasy points. And as long as that number continues to rise, his potential fantasy value continues to rise. Elijah Mitchell's our number 11. I watched back this game, and to be honest, Elijah Mitchell is getting stuffed in the backfield multiple times. But what makes Elijah Mitchell a very dynamic back is the fact that it literally just takes one run, and he can go for 40 yards. And that's really it. The scheme that this offensive line runs is all about taking it to the outside and just letting these running backs run free, whether they're pulling tackles, pulling guards, pulling tight ends. You put a lead blocker in front of this guy, whether it's Kyle Juszczyk, hopefully George Kittle coming back this week, and you just let him go. And he's been extremely effective in doing so. I mean, in the last 2 weeks, he's had back-to-back 100-yard rushing games. On top of that, that's his third on the season, including week 1 against the Detroit Lions. With J.J. Watt out, and the fact that the Arizona Cardinals just gave up 137 rushing yards to A.J. Dillon and Aaron Jones this last week, makes me feel, like this is a pretty good matchup for a division rival. The last time these two teams played, of course, the quarterback position was a little bit different for the 49ers, and it obviously did lead to them running the ball far less. But I think now that we have a healthy Elijah Mitchell, a healthy Jimmy Garoppolo, and a healthy offensive line with Trent Williams back and George Kittle returning, they're just going to continue to try to run over the Arizona Cardinals defense and keep Kyler off the field as much as they possibly can. Moving on to Damien Harris, our number 12. Another stat that I wanted to mention, in the last 4 games, Damien Harris has a total of 5 touchdowns. Since week 5, he's the number 7 overall running back in fantasy. That's pretty much after the 2 games in which he had some of the toughest matchups going against the New Orleans Saints and Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So since then, unstoppable. Takes on the Carolina Panthers. Now you may be wondering, the Carolina Panthers matchup, they're giving up, the 31st fewest points to opposing running backs. So really, one of the toughest matchups at the position. Doesn't mean anything. They have benefited mightily from their early schedule, and as of late, they have given up points. Zeke for 143 and a touchdown. Dalvin Cook, 140 and a touchdown. Devontae Booker, 66 yards on the ground and a touchdown. And Cordarrelle Patterson, 72 all-purpose yards and a receiving touchdown. In my opinion, Damien Harris, as he's going to continue to be the lead back of this team, running the rock as many times as he is. I mean, he's getting 20-plus touches a game. That kind of opportunity is second to none in the National Football League, except for guys like perhaps Jonathan Taylor, Najee Harris, Derrick Henry. Those guys, of course, are at the top of the pack for a reason. Damien Harris is slowly but surely getting there. Moving on to the RB2 category, beginning with Cordarrelle Patterson. I had Cordarrelle Patterson in a very similar position, mainly because, again, his upside is going to be determined by a touchdown. And, luckily for him in terms of his total fantasy value, but obviously sad to hear, Calvin Ridley is going to be taking some time away from the team in order to work on himself. And as he takes the time away from the team, this team needs a wide receiver. I mean, Russell Gage isn't doing anything much. We've seen Tajay Sharp try to be an option there. Kyle Pitts disappeared this last week. They need a receiving option that is going to be a continuous threat. And like I mentioned earlier, the New Orleans Saints, they're only giving up 3.02 yards per carry. So with that all mentioned, I think this is going to be a matchup in which we're going to see a lot of heavy utilization from Cordarrelle Patterson as a receiving option. Coming off a week in which he had 5 catches, 37 yards, and a receiving touchdown, he is probably going to be catching the ball maybe 7+ times this week. And if that's going to be the case, as it has been all season long, he is going to be an incredible option. He always has the ability to run the ball. He had himself 9 carries this last week. As long as he's getting in that double-digit range of total rushing attempts, and of course getting in that range of getting upwards of 5 or more targets, the opportunity is just pretty much written for him, and the success is only to follow. Moving on to our number 14, we have Michael Carter. In the last 4 games, he has scored 3 touchdowns on the ground. Not to mention, in the last 2 games with Mike White at the quarterback position, he has seen 23 total targets. This last week, 14 targets, 9 receptions, 95 receiving yards, on top of the fact that he ran for 5.1 yards per carry on the ground. This is a player that we mentioned in the offseason, somebody that I wanted to go after because, again, Tevin Coleman, Ty Johnson, these are not competing backs that are going to be able to impose their will on opposing defenses. And we've seen that already, as he's continuing to get upwards of 10 rushing attempts per game on the ground for the last 4 games, and he's getting himself a lot of utilization out of the backfield with the quarterback change. He does take on the Indianapolis Colts, and it is a tougher matchup, but it's all about opportunity leading to success in fantasy football. We talk about it every single week. As long as you are given the ample amount of opportunity, whether it is on the ground or through the air, the goal line work is being dominated by Michael Carter, and the receiving work is going to continue to rise his overall baseline floor of production. In my opinion, Michael Carter, an incredible play this week. And, he was the number 1 overall running back in terms of total points last week. On a short week, like I talked about Jonathan Taylor, it's all about running backs on Thursday night. Carter is going to be able to dominate. Devontae Booker is our number 15. You may be wondering, where is Saquon Barkley, Andrew? Well, if Saquon Barkley does play, he is a top 8 running back probably in fantasy this week. He may be the number 9 now, push down Nick Chubb. But in terms of what Devontae Booker has done, if in fact he plays and there is no Saquon Barkley this week, they take on the Las Vegas Raiders, giving up the 11th most points to opposing running backs. And let's talk about what Devontae Booker has done as of late. In terms of total fantasy points, 19.3, 8.9, 13.6, and 15.0. In the last 4 consecutive games, he's been an incredible overall running back, and those kind of performances on a weekly basis have solidified ourselves with a solid RB2. And the fact that he's coming off of a week in which he had 6 catches for over 60 yards, 125 all-purpose yards, and now he gets to take on a matchup like the Las Vegas Raiders, it's just absolutely just pure sweetness for us, for those of you who were able to pick up Devontae Booker in free agency a couple weeks back when Saquon went down with his respective injury. Nonetheless, if Devontae Booker is the lead back, I'm firing him up. If it's Saquon, like I mentioned, he's probably our number 9 back on the week. Moving on to Chuba Hubbard. Now, you may be wondering, where is Christian McCaffrey, Andrew? Isn't he going to play this week? I heard an interview, I read an interview that Matt Rule had, the Carolina Panthers head coach, last week, and he had said, we're hoping that we can get Christian McCaffrey back by week 10. They are still reserved in the idea that, yes, he may be coming back from the injured reserve this week, but they want to go ahead and see a full week of practice before they send him out there once again. Because, again, they know that there's always a possibility of re-injury, and they don't want to force it and lose their player, especially considering they have a 4-4 record, and they could make a push for the playoffs if Christian McCaffrey could come in and turn things around. If Christian McCaffrey does play, he's a top 5 running back. Now, with that said, when in fact I expect Chuba Hubbard to play this week, and Christian McCaffrey may end up missing, Hubbard played against the New England Patriots, the 16th, easiest matchup at the position, literally middle of the pack. But we're looking at a week in which Chuba Hubbard had 24 carries for 82 yards and a rushing touchdown late in that game. Obviously, the rushing touchdown was trying to be stolen by Sam Darnold until he got a helmet straight to the chest that concussed him. Hopefully, he's healthy and ready to play this week, because if he is not healthy and ready to go, a backup quarterback against Bill Belichick's defense is going to be hard to kind of figure itself out. But Sam Darnold, he has his fair share of history with Bill Belichick and seeing ghosts. So hopefully that's not going to be the case either. But either way, I think Chuba Hubbard, the amount of opportunity he's getting, the goal line work he's getting, and the ability to get receptions out of the backfield continue to build for him. If he's playing, he's my number 16. Moving on to Josh Jacobs, our number 17, coming off of the bye week. Last time we saw him, he left early with an injury. Hopefully that is not going to be a reoccurring thing as they take on the New York Giants defense, giving up the 8th most points to opposing running backs. I just want to go ahead and mention some of the recent performances against this New York Giants defense because it is relevant and there is a lot of value to be had, and that is why we are firing up Josh Jacobs. Again, just last night, Monday Night Football, we had ourselves the Kansas City Chiefs duo of Derrick Gore and, of course, Darrel Williams combined for 97 rushing yards and a touchdown, 6 catches for 61 yards. We saw Henderson of the Rams go for 78 yards, 2 rushing touchdowns. Zeke, 110 yards, 2 touchdowns. Alvin Kamara, 120 yards on the ground. Taysom Hill stole 2 of his rushing touchdowns on the goal line, but I digress. The entire point is this defense cannot stop the run for the New York Giants. Josh Jacobs, he's a guy that typically likes to, hang out around the goal line, get himself a couple carries here and there, find himself with 50 yards and a touchdown and a relevant fantasy performance. Moving on to our number 18, we have Myles Gaskin. I think Myles Gaskin is an incredible play. In the last 2 weeks alone, he has seen a total of 27 rushing attempts and 8 total targets. Of course, his last week took on the Buffalo Bills, and though they were down the entire game, he still had himself 12 rushing attempts for 36 yards. Not the greatest yards per carry average, and only 3 receptions for 19 yards, but it is an incredible defense over there in Buffalo, the best in the National Football League right now. So as I progress and we see, okay, they take on the Houston Texans, the 7th easiest matchup at the position. Henderson just went for 90 yards on the ground and, of course, 2 touchdowns. Could have been 3 touchdowns. Connor went for 64 yards on the ground and a touchdown. Edmonds, 81 rushing yards in that same contest. Jonathan Taylor, 145 rushing yards, 2 touchdowns against Houston's defense, who just traded away a couple pieces here and there. I think Myles Gaskin could have another one of these breakout games here this week, as the entire offense will be in an advantageous position. And, of course, Myles Gaskin will be leading the charge as the starting back of this team. Chase Edmonds is our number 19. Chase Edmonds in the last 2 weeks has played 70% and 60% of the offensive snaps. He's heavily dominating snaps, but obviously not getting as much total upside as a running back like James Conner, because James Conner is dominating in terms of touchdowns. James Conner has 8 total touchdowns this year, and only this last week, in week 8 on Thursday Night Football against the Green Bay Packers, did Chase Edmonds score his first touchdown of the season. Just putting it in perspective, it does make a difference. 6 points here and there will make the world a difference. And the fact that though Chase Edmonds did end up playing over 60% of the snaps this last week, only getting 7 rushing attempts and 3 total receptions, 10 touches, is not enough to constitute him being a higher end RB2, regardless of what offense and entire scheme that's related with the Arizona Cardinals. Going into this upcoming week's matchup, taking on the San Francisco 49ers, with Kyler Murray dealing with an injury. If Kyler plays, and of course it's an ankle injury, guess what's going to happen? He's not going to be as mobile. He's going to check it down more often. Hopefully, that'll be in the direction of Chase Edmonds. That's what I'm expecting, and that is why I believe number 19 is a perfect spot for him. Number 20 is Melvin Gordon. I want to go ahead and once again reiterate, the Denver Broncos backfield is purely a matter of who is on the field in that given drive. They switch every other drive. Melvin Gordon, then Javonte, then Melvin Gordon, then Javonte. As long as this team is going to continue to fluctuate and split carries down the middle, if you're on the field in good field positioning and the play is called for you to catch it out of the backfield and you're going to score a touchdown, that is the biggest difference maker. That's purely it. There's no difference between these two running backs, except for the fact that, yes, Melvin Gordon has scored 3 touchdowns in the last 2 games. That is the biggest difference maker. He has gotten the touchdown opportunity that Javonte Williams hasn't. But if we flip the roles, they're just as efficient as each other, and they're just as talented. But for right now, as long as Melvin Gordon is going to be the guy that's getting the plays called for him, going to be on the field in those given drives, and, of course, the offensive coordinator is of the belief that Melvin Gordon should be on the field more often, then so be it. He'll be ranked higher. Moving on, we have Boston Scott as our number 21. He will be the starting running back of this team going forward until Miles Sanders returns. He played 45% of the snaps against the Detroit Lions, and that was in a blowout game in which, of course, he didn't have to play that many. Going forward, I look at the Los Angeles Chargers defense, giving up the 3rd most points to opposing running backs, giving up already 10 touchdowns to opposing running backs this season. And I think to myself, well, there's a very good chance that Boston Scott, coming off of 12 carries for 60 yards and 2 rushing touchdowns, could end up scoring himself a high amount of total fantasy points. But there is always the possibility of Jordan Howard, Kenneth Gainwell, and of course Jalen Hurts vulturing touchdowns down on the goal line. That is a matter of just waiting and seeing what's going to transpire. But either way, I think Boston Scott's a great option this week because of the incredible matchup. Moving on to Darrel Williams. I know Darrel Williams had a touchdown taken from him yesterday, and a lot of his total carries that could have potentially been his was siphoned away to Derrick Gore. But take into account, in each of the last 2 weeks, Darrel Williams has played 64% of the offensive snaps for the Kansas City Chiefs. So whether it is Derrick Gore or Jerick McKinnon in this backfield, he is going to continue to be an active part here as Darrel Williams is getting his opportunity. 13 carries for 49 yards, 6 targets, 6 catches, 61 yards. As he's going to potentially be the receiving back threat for this offense going forward, as Mahomes learns to check it down finally in his career, we're going to have to wait and see what happens when CEH comes back, whether that is this week or next. But I think Darrel Williams, still a fantastic option in fantasy with a lot of upside because, of course, the offense he's associated with. Moving on to Khalil Herbert, our number 23. Khalil Herbert ran for over 100 yards against the Tampa Bay, Buccaneers defense. But taking on the Pittsburgh Steelers this week does not, scare me in any factor. The only thing that I'm worried about is if he's not able to get himself a rushing touchdown, his upside is diminished because mobile quarterbacks do not like to throw the ball to their respective running backs out of the backfield. There's a reason why Ryan Nall played more than Damien Williams this last week for the Chicago Bears. So going into this upcoming week's matchup, I think to myself, well, if we're going to have a mobile quarterback against a tough defense, well, unfortunately, Khalil Herbert is going to have to be ranked a little bit lower. And that is where I have him here at number 23. Though I do believe he's going to be a huge part of this offense, we limit him at this regard. Moving on to our number 24, James Conner. I like James Conner a lot, don't get me wrong, but he is an unbelievably touchdown-reliant running back. And though a lot of running backs are relying on him, we're talking about the running back that has the 2nd most rushing touchdowns this season with 8. I mean, Kenyan Drake last season, throughout the entirety of the year, only had 10 rushing touchdowns for the Cardinals, which is why we anticipated something of this matter. There's a reason why I talked about James Conner in a video this offseason as, a sleeper. Because if this offense is going to give him the opportunity to be the goal line back here, well, of course, he's going to find a lot of value. 14.2 fantasy points, only 22 rushing yards last week, but it didn't matter on those 5 carries. Again, he only touched the ball 5 times last week, but was a relevant running back. If he's not going to get as many touches going forward, and he's going to only play about 30% of the offensive snaps, 40% of the offensive snaps like he has in the last 2 weeks, then of course his upside is going to be limited. And with touchdowns being very scarce in some offenses, if this Arizona Cardinals offense stops moving the ball and stops getting down in the red zone because of the injuries to Kyler Murray, it could potentially affect the bottom line of James Conner. Moving on to the RB3 category, we begin with Zack Moss. We love Zack Moss, but the issue is he's not getting touchdowns, and that's literally all we need. Just score a touchdown. 19 yards, 2.4 yards per carry against Miami of all defenses is an embarrassing, outcome nonetheless. But 6 receptions on 7 targets. that was lucky of him. To get himself that work in the receiving game is absolutely lucky. If we are not going to see a factor of potential garbage time in which Josh Allen puts up so many points that Zack Moss is able to run the ball 20 times in the fourth quarter and get himself a rushing touchdown, then Zack Moss is nothing less than the number 30 overall back as a guy that maybe puts up 7 points. But otherwise, we're hoping for double-digit points if he's able to find the end zone. Moving on to our number 26, we have Jeremy McNichols. You may have been wondering, where am I going to place the Tennessee Titans running backs? I don't know what kind of distribution of opportunity we're going to see, but I do anticipate Jeremy McNichols leading the backfield this upcoming week, because not only did they play the Los Angeles Rams, and it is a tougher matchup now that they'll have Aaron Donald and Von Miller on that defensive line, but they're also going to have to deal with Adrian Peterson trying to get into football shape and get himself acclimated with this offense and the chemistry and all that jazz. But Jeremy McNichols already has that, as he's been in with this offense, and he's going to be himself a great receiving threat, and even will run the ball a consistent amount. The running backs coach for the Tennessee Titans has said that Jeremy McNichols is ready and doesn't want to relinquish the opportunities that he's going to be given, but it's only a matter of time until that's going to happen. And we all know that. The running backs coach knows that. The Tennessee Titans know that. So going forward into this week, sure, this may be Jeremy McNichols' best week, similar to how Tyson Williams earlier this year for the Ravens had a couple good weeks until Latavius Murray and Devontae Freeman caught up in this offense, got into fully playing shape, and eventually Adrian Peterson will take over. Now, speaking of Adrian Peterson, here he is as our number 27. With that all mentioned, I truly do think if this team gets down to the goal line, guess who's going to run a touchdown? Adrian Peterson will. And what way to get yourself integrated with the team than scoring on week one? That's always going to be a possibility. And though, the Los Angeles Rams defense is good, they have been giving up yardage here and there. And that's something that they have been prone to do. And they have been giving up a lot of garbage time points as of late. I mean, the Houston Texans had no business scoring more than 20 points last week, but they did so anyway because of garbage time taking a huge lead. Could be the case this week, but either way, Adrian Peterson, not a bad option going into this week in an offense that certainly will be scoring, whether it is early or late. Moving on to Javonte Williams, our number 28. It is purely just a matter of whether he scores a touchdown or not. If he scores a touchdown, if he is on that play or on that given drive that they're successfully getting down to the goal line, then sure, he will score and he'll be fine. Otherwise, the receiving work has been scarce in comparison to weeks past, and as that continues to progress, we're going to have to keep an eye on Javonte Williams. Like I keep mentioning, week 12 and on, that is when Javonte will have his breakout. We're still pretty much going to have to deal with these RB3 fluctuating, inconsistent performances until then, because the matchups just become unstoppable at that point. Moving on to A.J. Dillon, our number 29. A.J. Dillon's coming off an incredible week in which he had 16 carries for 68 yards, 4.9 yards per carry against a very good Arizona Cardinals defense. Nonetheless, A.J. Dillon had opportunities, and he definitely delivered on them. Prior week, of course, in week 7, an early fumble against the Washington football team, which rendered him pretty much a deep backup. I mean, they benched him, and they didn't bring him off the bench for the rest of that game. Nonetheless, I look at this opportunity that they have against the Kansas City Chiefs, and I think, Kansas City has been torched on the ground through the air by opposing running backs all season long for the last 3 years. So this isn't going to be something of a difference. This is going to be a game in which the Green Bay Packers score early and often and run the ball in the second half with A.J. Dillon. Moving on to Tony Pollard, another one of these backup running backs that has a lot of potential. The reason why I believe in Tony Pollard mainly has to do with the fact that, again, like I mentioned with Zeke, this defense for the Denver Broncos no longer has Von Miller. They're giving up 123 yards per game on the ground for the last 4 consecutive weeks and have given up 5 touchdowns to opposing running backs in the last 4 consecutive weeks. When I look at this defense, I think, with Dak back, with Tyron Smith hopefully healthy, and this offense fully turning out great performances, Pollard, yes, he may not be the touchdown upside guy, but the yardage, the receptions, that's going to be there and solidify his fantasy performance. Jordan Howard's our number 31. He could steal a touchdown, and that's purely his entire value. If he comes in and vultures a touchdown, similar to the way that he did last season in the beginning of the 2020 year for the Miami Dolphins, comes in 1 yard, punches it in, leaves, then he finds himself value. And against the Los Angeles Chargers that have given up 10 plus touchdowns already to running backs this season, give up the 3rd most points to opposing running backs, give up the most rushing statistic points, yards, and touchdowns already this year amongst all teams, just seems like a perfect game for Jordan Howard to succeed. It's just a matter of what we see from Jalen Hurts and Boston Scott on the goal line. Derrick Gore is our number 32, a guy that you should potentially be picking up this upcoming week if, in fact, Clyde Edwards-Helaire is not going to be back, because Derrick Gore was a huge part of this offense. I want to go ahead and make it be known. He played 16 snaps, and in those 16 snaps had 12 total opportunities. 12 total opportunities in the form of 11 rushing attempts and 1 target for 10.8 fantasy points. Had himself 4.4 yards per carry, a rushing touchdown. Takes on the Green Bay Packers. If he's not going to see receiving work, and he's going to be limited to, of course, just being a running back that is punching it up the middle and only getting those opportunities, and outside of that, really not expanding his role, then it's going to be very reliant on a touchdown. And that is what he makes him a little bit of a sketchier play, but nonetheless, a play and maybe a waiver wire pickup. Moving on to Ty Johnson at number 33. Ty Johnson is purely going to have to rely upon receiving work. If he does not get himself upwards of 5 catches for 50 yards, he is not going to be a relevant enough option for us to want to throw him out there. But hopefully, like we saw last week, Mike White targeted the running back position 20 times. If we are going to see anything remotely close to that, then by goodness, I think Ty Johnson could be an even better back than number 33. But again, let's just put it in perspective. Ty Johnson came off of a week in which he had 5 catches for 71 yards. If he doesn't end up scoring a touchdown, he's a 10-point player. At 10 points, I'll take it. And that is why we have him at 33, because we're hoping for that kind of upside. But if he doesn't end up getting there, that would be an unfortunate matter. Moving on to Carlos Hyde at number 34. I do not expect James Robinson to be playing this week, considering he is dealing with a heel injury that is going to be something of a pain. If it is more severe, he could potentially miss multiple weeks here. But the issue with Carlos Hyde, despite having a pretty decent 10 fantasy point week this last week, is they take on the Buffalo Bills. And unless he's going to catch the ball a bunch of times, like he did last week, 8 targets, 6 receptions, 40 yards, he is going to be an absolute bust as the Buffalo Bills give up the fewest points to opposing running backs. Moving on to Mike Davis. If you want 9 fantasy points, this is the man to do it. Outside of, week 7's performance, in which, of course, he was absolutely irrelevant with only 1 fantasy point, every single other week for the last 6 games, he has put up 9 or more fantasy points. We're hopefully going to continue to see him, getting utilized in the passing game. 6 targets, 5 receptions, which will lead to his overall baseline of value increasing. But again, if you want, a guy that's playing against the New Orleans Saints, probably won't find much success on the ground, not getting as many touches as Cordarrelle Patterson, then Mike Davis is your option there. The final player I wanted to mention today, before we finish today's episode, is Kenyan Drake. I do believe Kenyan Drake, based on the snap counts and the way that they are continuing to use him, despite, of course, the fact that, of course, Josh Jacobs is in this backfield, is that they're going to alternate similar to how Josh Jacobs did with Devontae Booker prior to Devontae Booker leaving in 2021. But in 2020, the exact distribution of opportunity goes as such. Every 3rd series, Josh Jacobs is on the bench. So he'll play the first 2 series, then he'll go and sit the bench, and it'll be Kenyan Drake for the entire 3rd series. And then rinse and repeat until otherwise noted. If Kenyan Drake's going to be utilized in this offense, he has shown that he is an extremely effective running back as of late and probably deserves more opportunity. And if that's going to be the case, could be a great option. Those are my top 36 running back rankings for week 9 of the 2021 fantasy football season. Thank you, everybody, for watching. Again, rankings are subject to change. We will have our wide receiver video tomorrow talking about matchups and, of course, the top 36 rankings. If you guys haven't yet already, subscribe, like today's video, check out Underdog Fantasy, and use promo code Andrew. If you go ahead and sign up today and use promo code Andrew, Underdog Fantasy is willing to match up to $100 of your first deposit. It's an extremely generous offer. Why not go ahead and take advantage of it today? Again, promo code Andrew. Thank you guys, and until tomorrow, I'll see you guys. Peace.